You wake up. It is a completely normal Tuesday morning. The alarm hasn't gone off yet. The room is still swimming in that heavy, grey, pre-dawn light. And the very first thing you are aware of is the weight on the edge of the bed. You open your eyes and there is your cat. Or your dog. Just sitting there, perfectly still, staring at you. Not asking for food. Not nudging you for a walk. Just watching you with an unblinking, dark, glassy intensity that makes the tiny hairs on the back of your neck stand up for just a fraction of a second. You blink, you stretch, you say something dumb like, "What is it, buddy?" The spell breaks. They yawn, turn around, and start licking their paw. The strange moment is over. You get out of bed, you make your coffee, you check your email, and you forget all about it. But here is a question nobody actually asks, mostly because the answer terrifies us. What were they looking at? I don't mean that in a cute, "oh, they love you so much" way. I mean literally. What information were they receiving from your body in that silent room? We have all heard the stories, the urban legends that always seem to turn out to be true. The family dog who starts howling inexplicably 3 hours before the grandfather has a fatal stroke. The cat in the nursing home who wanders the halls, walks into a specific room, jumps onto the bed of a patient, and curls up. And then, without fail, within a matter of hours, that patient dies. And right about now, you are probably rolling your eyes and thinking, come on, we are not doing this. We are not talking about pet psychics or sixth senses or seeing auras or ghosts hovering in the corner of the ceiling. You are right, we absolutely are not. We are not talking about mysticism today. We are talking about biology. And honestly, the biological truth of what is happening in those moments is far stranger, far heavier, and infinitely more unsettling than any ghost story you could ever invent. Because what if the animal doesn't need a sixth sense? What if their standard 5 senses are already so alien, so overwhelmingly powerful, that they can perceive the exact moment the machinery of your body begins to permanently break down? What if death is not a sudden, invisible spiritual exit, but a loud, messy, highly fragrant biological process, and you are just the only one in the room who can't smell it? If we are right, and animals can genuinely sense the approach of human death, then we have to ask the uncomfortable question. What exactly are they sensing? Is there a physical, measurable frequency to human mortality? Buckle up. This is the rabbit hole we are going down today. Let's start at the very beginning. What does it actually mean to predict a death? Back in 2007, a geriatrician named Dr. David Doser published an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. This is not a tabloid. This is one of the most prestigious, rigorous medical journals on the planet, and the subject of his peer-reviewed article was a fluffy, black and white cat named Oscar. Oscar lived at the Steer House Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Rhode Island. It was a facility primarily for patients with severe dementia, and Oscar was not a friendly cat. He wasn't the kind of therapy animal that purred and rubbed up against everyone's legs. Mostly, he liked to be left alone. He would hide under desks, stare out windows, and generally ignore the human beings entirely, except for one very specific circumstance. Every day, Oscar would do medical rounds. He would walk down the hallway, sniff the air, peek into a room, and move on. But sometimes he would walk into a room, jump onto a patient's bed, sniff the air around their face, and then curl up in a tight ball next to them. Whenever Oscar did this, the nursing staff immediately went to the phone and called the patient's family to tell them to come to the hospital right away. Because they knew. If Oscar lay down on your bed, you had about 2 to 4 hours left to live. I'm not making this up. The medical staff literally used the cat as an early warning system. By the time Dr. Doser wrote his article, Oscar had accurately predicted over 50 deaths. He was so accurate that in one famous instance, the doctors checked a patient, noticed all the vital signs were dropping, and assumed the end was imminent. They brought Oscar into the room. Oscar took one sniff, jumped off the bed, and walked out. The doctors thought, aha, the cat is finally wrong. The cat was not wrong. The patient rallied, survived the night, and lived for another 2 days. On the final day, Oscar walked into the room entirely on his own, curled up, and the patient died 3 hours later. Oscar beat the medical charts. You'll say, that's just confirmation bias. The nurses only remembered the times he was right. Okay, but the staff rigorously tracked his movements for years. The data was there. He wasn't guessing. He was observing something the doctors, with all their stethoscopes and monitors and decades of medical school, simply could not see. So, how did he do it? Let's start with the most obvious thing. We need to talk about the sensory gap between us and the animals living in our houses. We are primarily visual creatures. You and I navigate the world by looking at it. Light hits our retinas, our brains decode the shapes and colors, and we call that reality. But for a dog or a cat, vision is secondary. Their primary reality is chemical. They live in a world of invisible architecture built entirely out of floating molecules. Look at your dog's nose. Really think about it. A human being has about 6 million olfactory receptors in our nose. That sounds like a lot, until you realize that a standard German Shepherd has around 225 million. A bloodhound has up to 300 million. And the part of their brain dedicated to analyzing those smells is proportionally 40 times larger than ours. To try and put that into human terms, researchers use a visual metaphor. If human vision was equivalent to being able to see clearly for a third of a mile, a dog's sense of smell would allow them to see perfectly over 3,000 miles away. They can detect a single drop of blood diluted in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But it's not just about distance or dilution, it's about time. When you walk into an empty room, you see an empty room. When your dog walks into that same room, they are reading a historical archive. They can smell who was sitting in that chair 3 hours ago. They can smell the anxiety sweat you left on the keyboard. They can smell if the other dog down the street walked past the window yesterday. They literally smell time. So here is where it gets interesting. If their nose is that unfathomably precise, what does a human being smell like to them? You think you smell like your body wash or your laundry detergent, or maybe a light sweat. But to an animal, you are a walking, talking chemical factory. With every breath you exhale, with every microscopic flake of skin you shed, you are broadcasting a highly detailed biological status report. And that brings us to the core of the mystery. Death is not an event, it is a process. We tend to think of death as a light switch. Click, you are alive. Click, you are dead. The heart stops, the brain goes dark, the end. But biology doesn't work like that. The shutting down of a human body is a cascading failure of complex machinery, and it starts long before the heart actually stops beating. When a person is approaching the end of their life, especially in a slow decline from old age or illness, the organs begin to fail sequentially. The liver stops filtering toxins, the kidneys stop clearing waste, and when the internal engines of the body begin to stutter, the exhaust changes. The human body starts producing a radically different cocktail of what scientists call volatile organic compounds, VOCs. As cells begin to starve for oxygen, metabolism shifts. The body might start producing higher levels of ketones, which have a sickly, sweet, almost fruity odor. Lactic acid builds up. The breath changes. The sweat changes. And you might think, okay, but surely this is microscopic. A cat couldn't possibly decode complex metabolic pathology. Well, let me introduce you to Joy Milne. In 2015, researchers at Edinburgh University were baffled by a Scottish woman named Joy Milne. Joy is a retired nurse, and she has a rare condition called hyperosmia. She just has an incredibly sensitive sense of smell, and she claimed that she could smell Parkinson's disease. Her husband had died of Parkinson's, and she noticed that years before he was ever diagnosed, his scent had fundamentally changed. He developed a thick, musky, almost woody odor. The doctors were obviously skeptical, so they set up a blind test. They gave her 12 t-shirts. 6 had been worn by patients with Parkinson's, and 6 had been worn by completely healthy people. Joy smelled them one by one. She correctly identified all 6 of the Parkinson's patients. But she also pointed to one of the healthy shirts and said, "This person has Parkinson's too." The researchers told her she was wrong. That person was in the control group. He was totally fine. 8 months later, that healthy man went to his doctor. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Joy Milne had smelled a neurodegenerative disease accumulating in his skin oils almost a year before the medical establishment could detect a single symptom. Now, sit with that for a second. That is a human woman. A human woman with human biology. If Joy Milne can smell the microscopic protein misfoldings of Parkinson's disease through a t-shirt, what on earth do you think Oscar the cat, with a nose evolved over tens of millions of years to detect the faintest chemical shifts in living tissue, is smelling when a patient's kidneys finally stop working? He isn't sensing a ghost. He is smelling the factory closing down. He is smelling the chemical transition from a living organism to an inanimate object. But if you think that's strange, wait. Let me throw you something even wilder, because it is not just mammals that speak this invisible language. The chemical broadcast of death is so deeply wired into the natural world that it transcends entirely different branches of the evolutionary tree. Back in 1958, the legendary Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson was studying ants. He wanted to know how an ant colony deals with its dead. When an ant dies inside the nest, it obviously poses a hygiene risk. So worker ants will pick up the dead body, carry it out of the nest, and drop it in a designated refuse pile, a sort of ant graveyard. Wilson wondered, how do they know the ant is dead? They don't check for a pulse, they don't look for breathing. He discovered that when an ant dies, its body immediately begins to release a very specific chemical called oleic acid. It is the chemical signature of insect decay. It is a necromone. The moment the living ants smell oleic acid, their programming kicks in. They pick up whatever smells like that and throw it in the graveyard. So Wilson did an experiment. He took a tiny drop of synthetic oleic acid and he painted it onto the back of a perfectly healthy, perfectly alive worker ant. What happened next still breaks my brain every time I think about it. The live ant walked back into the colony. Instantly, her sisters grabbed her. She kicked, she struggled, she tried to fight them off, completely alive. But they didn't care. To them, the chemical signal overruled reality. She smelled dead, therefore she was dead. They dragged her, kicking and screaming, out of the nest and threw her onto the pile of corpses. And the absolute most absurd part? After she was thrown on the pile, the live ant sat there and started cleaning herself. But the smell of the oleic acid was so strong and her own programming was so rigid that she actually accepted her own death. She stopped struggling and just lay there among the dead bodies, waiting for the smell to wear off. Because her own chemical sensors were telling her, well, I smell like a corpse, I guess I'm dead. Yes, exactly that. Death is a language, and nature speaks it fluently. But when it comes to dogs and cats in our homes or our hospitals, it's not just the smell. The animal's perception is a multidimensional net, and as a human approaches death, every single strand of that net gets plucked. Consider temperature. As the human heart begins to weaken in the final hours, it cannot pump blood all the way to the extremities with the same force. The body goes into survival mode. It pulls the blood supply away from the hands, the feet, and the skin, trying to keep the core organs warm and functioning for as long as possible. The patient's skin temperature drops. Cats, as any pet owner knows, are absolute heat-seeking missiles. They have a core body temperature higher than ours, and they are constantly looking for external heat sources to maintain it. That's why they sleep on your laptop or in that one square of sunlight on the rug. When a patient is dying, their skin gets cold. And you might say, wait, if they're getting cold, why would the cat want to lie on them? Because what happens when a patient in a hospice starts getting cold? The nurses bring out the heated blankets. They wrap the patient in thick thermal layers. The dying person becomes the warmest spot in the room. And then there is the acoustic landscape. We cannot hear the internal rhythms of another person's body unless we press our ear directly against their chest. A dog or a cat can hear the hum of your biological engine from across the room. In the final hours of life, a phenomenon often occurs called Cheyne-Stokes respiration. It is a distinct, abnormal pattern of breathing. The breaths become very deep and rapid, then shallow, followed by a long, heavy pause that can last for almost a minute before the cycle starts again. To a human ear, it is deeply distressing to listen to. To an animal, it is a glaring, flashing siren. The acoustic rhythm of the apex predator in the room is breaking apart. The heartbeat is slowing down. The micro movements of the muscles are twitching differently. The animal sees the person. But the person is no longer acting like the creature they have known for years. The smell is wrong. The heat is wrong. The sound is wrong. The human being is dissolving right in front of them, turning into something else. Okay, that's settled. Science can describe the mechanism. They smell the volatile organic compounds. They hear the lungs struggling. They feel the temperature shift. But here is the problem nobody could solve for a very long time, and the question you are probably screaming at your screen right now. Why do they care? Why does the dog stay by the bed? Why does Oscar the cat jump up and curl into a ball next to the dying patient? If the human smells like failing biology and chemical decay, why don't they just run away? And this is where the story takes a sharp turn. This is where we have to look past the cozy domestic illusion of our pets and look at the ancient, brutal world they actually come from. We domesticated dogs about 30,000 years ago. We domesticated cats maybe 10,000 years ago. But the software running in their brains is millions of years old. And in the wild, the ability to detect when another creature is dying is the single most important survival skill you can possess. Think about a wolf pack. A pack is an incredibly tight, synchronized machine. If one member of the pack is sick or injured or dying, it is a liability to the entire group. They can't hunt as fast. They attract larger predators. A wolf needs to know instantly if its brother is failing. It needs to smell the change in the blood. Or flip it around. If you are a predator, you need to know which elk in the herd is the weakest. You don't want to waste energy chasing the strongest bull. You want the one whose organs are already starting to struggle. You smell the illness. You smell the vulnerability. Sensing death is not a supernatural gift. It is the oldest operating system on Earth. And here is the part we don't like to talk about. Here is the thing nobody puts on the cute infographic about loyal dogs and magical hospice cats. The tone of all these stories is always so romantic. We call Oscar the angel of death. We write tear-jerking articles about how the dog refused to leave the master's side because his heart was broken, because he wanted to comfort his human in their final moments, because he was bravely guarding their soul as it crossed over into the light. We project our own profound human grief onto the animal. We need them to be mourning with us. We need them to understand the tragedy of human mortality. But I have to tell you the other side of this, the cold, biological flip side of the coin. When that cat curls up next to the dying patient, he is not pondering the fragility of human existence. He does not know what a soul is. He does not know about the patient's past, or their regrets, or the people who will miss them. The cat is smelling meat that is preparing to break down. And that, to me, is the true darkness hidden inside this topic. It is the mirror turned back on us. We spend our days paying mortgages, worrying about unread emails, debating philosophy, buying clothes, building identities. We convince ourselves that our minds elevate us above the dirt. We think of ourselves as ethereal eyes piloting meat suits. We are terrified of death, so we wrap it in religion, in sterile hospitals, in quiet whispers, in ghost stories and spiritual comforts. But to the animal sitting on the edge of the bed, none of that exists. To the animal, you are just biology. You are a walking sack of fluids and proteins and chemical reactions. And when your time comes, all your philosophy and all your emails do not matter. Your body simply begins to rot, and it begins to rot while you are still breathing. The animal isn't psychic. The animal just sees you for exactly what you are, a biological organism returning to the soil. They smell the decay that you are too arrogant to admit is coming. It is a stark, absolute stripping away of human ego. The horror is not that the dog sees a ghost standing over your bed. The horror is that the dog sees that you are made of meat, and the meat is expiring, and there is nothing magical about it at all. Take that in for a moment. It feels heavy. It feels like it reduces us to nothing. But honestly, I don't think we should stop there. Because if you push through that initial revulsion, if you look past the fear of being just biology, there is something on the other side of that thought that feels both incredibly quiet and strangely beautiful. Yes, the stories are romanticized. Yes, the cat is just following the scent of volatile organic compounds and the heat of a blanket. Yes, the dog is just responding to the ancient pack software telling him that the apex predator is failing. But don't cancel out the magic just because you figured out how the trick is done. Reinterpret it. Think about what it actually means for an animal to stay in that room. When a human being is dying, the other humans in the room are usually terrified. We cry, we panic, we hide behind medical terminology, we look away, we try to pump the body full of drugs to delay the inevitable. We fight it. We fight the biology because we cannot accept it. Death is a failure to us. But the animal does not panic. The animal does not fear the smell of the ketones, or the sound of the Cheyne-Stokes breathing, or the dropping temperature of the skin. They don't judge it. They don't try to cure it. They don't run away in existential dread. They just accept it. To them, the biological unwinding of a life is just as natural, just as ordinary as the sun coming up or the rain falling. It is the way of the world. Science can describe the mechanism, but it cannot crawl inside the experience itself. We don't know exactly what it feels like to be a dog smelling time, or a cat sensing the chemical shift of mortality. The honest answer is, we don't know the depth of their inner lives. But we do know this. In a moment when human words fail entirely, when all our technology can do nothing but beep quietly in the background, the ancient, invisible network of the Earth is still functioning perfectly. You are not an isolated mind hovering above nature. You are woven deeply into it. You belong to the same biological web as the wolves and the ants and the cats in the hospice. Your body speaks the oldest language on the planet, and there are creatures listening to you. When your time comes, you will not leave this world quietly, and you will not leave it alone. You will be witnessed, not by angels, but by the Earth itself, acknowledging that one of its own is returning. It's sad, but it is also deeply, profoundly beautiful. And so we come back to where we started. You wake up. It is a completely normal Tuesday morning. The alarm hasn't gone off yet. The room is quiet. And there is your dog, or your cat, sitting on the edge of the bed, perfectly still, staring at you. It's the same dog on the same bed, but now you know what's behind those eyes. You know the vast, chemical, invisible ocean they are swimming in. You know that they are reading the very machinery of your existence. They aren't reading your mind. They are reading your biology, and your biology never lies. If you've got a dog, or a cat, or any creature living in your house, go scratch behind their ear right now. Look at them, and tell me in the comments, do you think someone is looking back at you in there? Do you think they know us better than we know ourselves? I read these, and I love seeing how your perspectives shift. And if you want to keep looking at the ordinary things in your life, your pets, your fears, your own body, and suddenly realizing how strange and deep they really are, join us. Hit subscribe. There is always another rabbit hole waiting.